My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 30 years old, and I still remember the exact smell of coffee and lilies that filled my grandfather's house the morning after his funeral. It's funny how grief has its own scent, bitter and floral, like hope dying slowly in a vase. I was standing in Grandpa Henry's kitchen, staring at the same wooden table where he'd taught me to play chess every Sunday for 23 years. The morning light streamed through his faded yellow curtains, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor that squeaked under my feet. Everything felt too quiet, too still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "Sarah, honey, come sit down." My mother's voice cut through the silence like a knife through butter. Patricia Mitchell, Mom to me, but Mrs. Mitchell to everyone else in Millfield, Georgia, was already seated at the head of the table, her perfectly styled blonde hair not showing a single strand out of place despite yesterday's emotional funeral service. I pulled out the same chair I'd sat in as a child, its wooden seat worn smooth from years of use. Across from me sat my brother Andrew, 28 years old, and still looking like he'd stepped out of a catalog even at 9 in the morning. His dark hair was perfectly combed, his button-down shirt pressed to perfection. He avoided eye contact with me, which wasn't unusual. Andrew and I had learned to exist in parallel lines years ago, never quite intersecting, never quite understanding each other. Dad wasn't there. Robert Mitchell had driven back to Atlanta at dawn for some urgent business matter that couldn't wait another day. Even grief took a back seat to his architectural firm's demands. "There are some things we need to discuss about your grandfather's affairs," Mom began, her tone crisp and businesslike. She had this way of making even the most personal conversations sound like board meetings. "I know yesterday was difficult for all of us." Difficult. That was one way to put it. I'd been the one to find Grandpa Henry slumped over in his garden 3 weeks ago, dirt still under his fingernails from planting the tomatoes he'd never see grow. I'd been the one staying with him these past months as his health declined, taking unpaid leave from both my jobs, the morning shift at Millfield Elementary where I worked as a teacher's aide, and my evening hours at Murphy's Diner downtown. The will reading was pretty straightforward, she continued, opening a manila folder that sat in front of her like evidence in a trial. "Your grandfather left the house to me, as expected. The car goes to your father. The furniture will be divided between family members." I nodded, waiting for her to mention what I knew was coming, what Grandpa Henry had told me himself just 2 months ago, when we were sitting on his back porch watching the sunset paint the Georgia sky in shades of orange and pink. "Sarah," he'd said, his weathered hands holding mine, "that 40-acre plot behind the house, the one with the old oak tree where your grandmother and I had our first kiss, that's going to be yours. It's good land, rich soil. Your grandmother always said it was blessed ground, perfect for new beginnings. Those 40 acres meant everything to me. Not just because they were beautiful, rolling hills covered in wild grass, bordered by a creek that ran clear and cold even in the heat of summer, but because they represented possibility. For the first time in my adult life, I could see a future that didn't involve scraping by paycheck to paycheck, living in my cramped studio apartment above the hardware store on Main Street. I'd already started making plans. A small house near the oak tree, maybe a vegetable garden, some chickens. I'd been researching sustainable farming techniques, dreaming of turning that land into something productive and beautiful, something that would make Grandpa Henry proud. "And then there's the matter of the 40 acres, Mom said, her voice taking on a different quality, softer, almost apologetic, but with an undertone I couldn't quite identify. "Yes," I said, leaning forward slightly. "Grandpa told me, Sarah, honey, I need you to understand something." She folded her hands on top of the manila folder, her wedding ring catching the morning light. "Your grandfather was, well, he was getting on in years. Sometimes older people make decisions with their hearts instead of their heads." A cold feeling started spreading through my chest, like ice water being poured slowly down my spine. What do you mean?" Andrew shifted in his chair, finally looking up from his coffee cup. His blue eyes, the same shade as mine, the same shade as Grandpa's, held something that might have been guilt, or maybe just discomfort. "The thing is," Mom continued, "Andrew is about to get married. Jessica's a wonderful girl, you know that, and they're planning to start their family soon. They need stability, a real foundation to build on. Mom, I don't understand what this has to do with—" "I sold the land, Sarah." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my breath catch in my throat, felt the room tilt slightly as if the earth had shifted on its axis. "You... what?" I sold the 40 acres to the Henderson family. They've been wanting to expand their cattle operation for years, and they made a very generous offer. More than that land is really worth, to be honest. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. But Grandpa left it to me. It's in the will. Actually, sweetheart, it's not. She opened the folder and pulled out a document. Your grandfather left the land to me, with instructions to see that it goes to good use, and I believe this is the best use for everyone involved. My hands were shaking as I reached for the will. There it was, in black and white. To my daughter, Patricia Mitchell, I leave the 40-acre plot known as the Back 40, trusting in her wisdom to ensure its proper stewardship. He told me it was mine, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He promised me. Oh, honey, I'm sure he meant well, but sometimes people say things in the moment that they don't really mean. Your grandfather loved you dearly, but he was a practical man. He knew you're still finding your way in life, still figuring things out. At 30 years old, after working 2 jobs for the past 8 years, after putting myself through community college while taking care of Grandpa Henry, after sacrificing relationships and opportunities to be the daughter who stayed close to home, I was still figuring things out. Where did the money go? I managed to ask, though part of me already knew the answer. Mom's smile was gentle, almost maternal. It's going toward Andrew's new business venture. You know he's always wanted to start his own construction company, and with the wedding expenses and Jessica's student loans, well, they need this more than anyone right now. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. Andrew had graduated from the University of Georgia with a business degree that Dad had paid for in full. He'd spent the last 6 years working for Dad's firm, living rent-free in the company apartment, driving a company car, his expenses covered while he gained experience. Jessica, his fiancée, came from the wealthy Wilson family who owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Atlanta. Her student loans were from law school at Emory, hardly a burden for someone whose father owned 3 car dealerships. Your brother needs this, Mom said, and something in her tone made it clear this wasn't a discussion. It was an announcement. He's got a real future ahead of him, Sarah, a family to provide for. This is an investment in the next generation of Mitchells. The next generation of Mitchells. As if I weren't a Mitchell. As if my future didn't matter. My dreams weren't worth investing in. I thought about all the Sundays I'd spent with Grandpa Henry while Andrew was off playing golf with his fraternity brothers. All the evenings I'd driven out to check on him while Andrew was networking at cocktail parties in Atlanta. All the times I'd held Grandpa's hand in the hospital while Andrew was too busy to make the 2-hour drive from the city. Sarah? Mom's voice seemed to come from very far away. Honey, are you all right? I know this is a lot to process. I was not all right. I was the furthest thing from all right that a person could be while still sitting upright in a kitchen chair. But I'd learned long ago that expressing anger or disappointment in the Mitchell household was like trying to hold water in cupped hands. It just ran through your fingers and left you empty-handed. I need some air, I said, pushing back from the table so abruptly that my chair scraped against the linoleum. Sarah, wait. Andrew spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. His voice was soft, uncertain. Maybe we should talk about this. Talk about what? Exactly. I turned to face him, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his expression. Guilt, maybe, or recognition. About how you get our grandfather's land without lifting a finger. About how Mom decided my future was worth less than your business plan. What exactly would you like to talk about, Andrew? It's not like that, he said quietly. You know it's not, but it was exactly like that. It was like every Christmas morning when Andrew got the bicycle and I got the doll. Like every report card day when his B's were celebrated and my A's were expected. Like every family gathering where his achievements were announced to the room while mine were mentioned in passing. If at all. I walked out of the kitchen and through the living room, past the bookshelf where Grandpa Henry kept his collection of Western novels, past the mantelpiece lined with photos of 3 generations of Mitchells. Most of the pictures featured Andrew, graduation photos, award ceremonies, vacation snapshots with Jessica's family. I appeared in a few of the older ones, usually standing slightly behind everyone else, smiling dutifully at the camera. The screen door slammed behind me as I stepped onto the front porch, where Grandpa Henry and I had spent countless evenings talking about everything and nothing. The porch swing where he'd told me about his dreams for that land, about the house his father had built there before the Depression forced the family to sell it to pay debts. Someday, he'd said, a Mitchell will live on that land again. Someone who understands what it means to work for something, to build something with their own hands. I'd thought he meant me. The morning air was thick with humidity, and the scent of honeysuckle from the vine that grew along the porch railing. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the Hendersons' cattle lowing in their pasture, the same pasture that would soon expand to include my grandfather's land, my land, the land that should have been my fresh start, my chance to build something lasting and beautiful. Behind me, I heard the screen door open again. Mom's footsteps were careful, measured as she approached. "Sarah, I know you're upset," she said, settling onto the porch swing beside me. "But try to see the bigger picture here. Andrew's success reflects on all of us. When he builds his construction company into something substantial, it elevates the whole family name." I stared out at the road that ran past Grandpa Henry's house, the same road I'd walked down as a child to catch the school bus, the same road that led to town where I'd spent the last 8 years serving coffee and helping kindergartners tie their shoes, saving every dollar I could for a future that had just been sold out from under me. "What about my success, Mom? When does that reflect on the family name?" She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentler, but somehow more devastating than her businesslike tone had been. "Oh, sweetheart, you're a good girl. You really are. You work hard. You're dependable. You take care of people. Those are wonderful qualities in a woman. But Andrew has ambition. He has vision. He's going to build something that lasts, something that matters, as if teaching children didn't matter, as if taking care of our aging grandfather didn't matter, as if the dreams I'd carefully cultivated over years of sacrifice and hard work didn't matter simply because they belonged to me instead of to Andrew. I stood up from the swing, my legs unsteady beneath me. I should go. "Sarah, please, don't leave like this. Stay for lunch. We can talk more about your plans." "What plans?" I turned to face her, and I was surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "You just sold my plans, Mom. You literally sold them to the highest bidder. There will be other opportunities," she said, but there was something hollow in her words, as if she didn't quite believe them herself. Other opportunities. At 30 years old, after spending my 20s working and saving and dreaming, after finding the one thing that felt like home, like possibility, there would be other opportunities. I walked down the porch steps and across the gravel driveway to my battered Honda Civic, the same car I'd been driving since college because I couldn't afford anything better. Behind me, I could hear Mom calling my name, but her voice seemed to come from another world, another life where daughters mattered as much as sons, where promises meant something, where love wasn't measured in dollar signs and business opportunities. As I drove away from Grandpa Henry's house, I caught a glimpse of Andrew standing in the kitchen window, watching me leave. For just a moment, our eyes met, and I saw something in his expression that might have been regret. But regret doesn't give you back the land that should have been yours. Regret doesn't restore the dreams that other people decide aren't worth protecting. I had 48 hours until the Henderson family took possession of my grandfather's land. 48 hours to figure out how to rebuild a life that had just been demolished by the two people who were supposed to love me most in the world. I drove aimlessly through the back roads of Millfield for what felt like hours, past cotton fields and peach orchards, past farmhouses where families were probably sitting down to Sunday lunch together. The Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on my windshield, and my car's ancient air conditioning wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. Eventually, I found myself parked outside Murphy's Diner, staring at the faded red sign that had welcomed travelers and locals alike for the past 40 years. It was closed on Sundays, but I had keys. Rita Murphy had given them to me 3 years ago, after I'd stayed late one night to help her clean up after a kitchen fire. "You're more reliable than my own kids," she'd said with a laugh that held more truth than humor. The diner was dim and cool inside, smelling of coffee grounds and the lemon oil Rita used to clean the vinyl booths. I made my way to the back booth, the one where truckers liked to sit because it had the best view of the parking lot, and just sat there in the silence, trying to make sense of what had happened. My phone buzzed against the Formica table. Andrew's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah." "Where are you?" "Does it matter?" I asked, surprised by how tired I sounded. "Of course it matters. Look, I know you're upset." "Upset?" I let out a laugh that sounded foreign even to my own ears. "Andrew, upset is when your coffee gets cold. Upset is when it rains on your day off. This is something else entirely." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear voices in the background. Mom's voice, and another one I didn't recognize. Probably Jessica, who'd driven down from Atlanta for the funeral and stayed for the family meeting, I apparently wasn't important enough to be included in. "Can we meet somewhere?" Andrew asked finally. "Just you and me. I want to explain." "Explain what?" "How you decided my inheritance should be yours. How Mom thought my dreams were worth less than your business plan." "I'm not sure there's much to explain, Andrew. It's not that simple." "Then make it simple for me." Another pause. "Meet me at the old bridge over Miller's Creek. The one where we used to go fishing with Grandpa. Can you do that?" Miller's Creek. I hadn't been there in years. Not since high school, when I'd gone there to think after Dad forgot to show up for my graduation ceremony. The same bridge where Grandpa Henry had taught both Andrew and me to cast a line, where he'd told us stories about the old days when the creek ran deeper and the fish were bigger. "Fine," I said. "Give me 20 minutes. I locked up the diner and drove the 5 miles to Miller's Creek, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The bridge was exactly as I remembered. A simple wooden structure barely wide enough for one car, spanning a creek that had probably been impressive once, but now trickled modestly between moss-covered rocks. Andrew was already there, leaning against the railing, still wearing his funeral clothes from yesterday. His dark hair was mussed now, no longer perfectly styled, and there were wrinkles in his shirt. He looked younger somehow, more like the brother I remembered from childhood before life had divided us into different categories. I parked beside his shiny black truck, a company vehicle, of course, and walked to the opposite end of the bridge. We stood there for a moment, separated by about 15 feet of weathered wood, and what felt like a lifetime of misunderstandings. "Remember when Grandpa brought us here?" Andrew said finally, his voice carried by the humid afternoon air. "You couldn't have been more than 8. You caught that huge catfish, and I was so jealous because mine was just a little bluegill. I remember you threw my fish back in the water while I wasn't looking," I replied. "Told Grandpa it had jumped out of the bucket on its own." Andrew's laugh was rueful. "I forgot about that. I was such a little shit. Some things never change." He turned to face me then, and I was startled to see genuine pain in his expression. "Sarah, I never asked for this. I didn't know Mom was planning to sell the land until this morning. But you didn't stop her." "How could I stop her? She's already signed the papers. The Henderson family is taking possession on Tuesday." I felt that cold sensation in my chest again, the one that had started in Grandpa's kitchen. "Tuesday. 2 days from now." I tried to talk to her about it. "After you left, I told her it wasn't right, that Grandpa had promised you that land." "And what did she say?" Andrew looked out over the creek, watching the water move sluggishly between the rocks. "She said you'd understand eventually, that you'd realize this was better for everyone in the long run." "Better for everyone." I tasted the words, found them bitter. "You mean better for you?" "I don't want the money, Sarah." The words hung between us like a challenge. I studied my brother's face, looking for the lie, but all I saw was exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "Then give it back." "It's not that simple. Mom's already transferred it to Jessica and me as a wedding gift. It's tied up in the business loan applications, the wedding expenses." He ran his hand through his hair, messing it up even more. "Everything's already in motion, so stop the motion. Call the bank, call the Henderson family, call whoever you need to call and make this right. I can't do that to Jessica. She's already started planning the business, picked out office space. She's given her notice at the law firm where she works. Our whole future is built around this opportunity. Our whole future, not my future, which had just been sold to finance theirs. Not my dreams, which had been deemed less important than theirs. Their future, built on the grave of mine." "What about my future, Andrew?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I honestly don't know." At least he was being honest. More honest than Mom had been with her talk of other opportunities and finding your way in life. "Do you know what that land meant to me?" I asked, moving closer to where he stood. "Do you have any idea what I've sacrificed to get to a point where I could actually use it?" "Sarah? No, let me finish. I've worked 2 jobs for 8 years. Andrew, 2 jobs. While you were in college, I was slinging hash at Murphy's and cleaning houses on the weekends to pay for community college classes. While you were living rent-free in Dad's company apartment, I was sharing a studio above the hardware store with mice and a leaky ceiling. My voice was getting louder, but I couldn't seem to control it. 8 years of swallowed words were trying to come out all at once. While you were networking at cocktail parties, I was sitting with Grandpa Henry in doctors' waiting rooms, holding his hand while he got test results that scared him. I was the one who moved in with him when he got too weak to take care of himself. I was the one who found him in the garden that day. Andrew. I was the one who called 911 and rode with him in the ambulance and held his hand while he died. Andrew's face had gone pale. I know you did more than... Do you? Do you really know? Because when I called you that day to tell you Grandpa was gone, you asked if you could postpone coming down until the weekend because you had a client presentation that couldn't be rescheduled. That's not fair. Fair? The word exploded out of me like a gunshot. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair. Andrew, fair would be the person who sacrificed for our grandfather getting the inheritance he promised. Fair would be the daughter who stayed home and took care of the family getting some recognition for once. Fair would be my dreams mattering as much as yours do. I was crying now. Hot, angry tears that I wiped away with the back of my hand. I hadn't cried in front of Andrew since we were children, and I hated that he was seeing me break down now. I had plans, I continued, my voice shaking. Real plans. I was going to build a little house near the oak tree where Grandpa used to sit and read. I was going to plant a garden, maybe raise some chickens, start a small organic farm. I had it all figured out. Andrew. For the first time in my adult life, I could see a future that didn't involve scraping by, that didn't involve working myself to death just to pay rent on a place that doesn't even feel like home. Andrew stepped toward me, his hand outstretched as if to comfort me, but I backed away. And you know what the worst part is? It's not just that Mom chose you over me. Again, it's that she didn't even think twice about it. It didn't even occur to her that my dreams might be worth protecting, that I might have something valuable to contribute to this family. You do contribute, Andrew said quietly. You contributed more than any of us. Then why doesn't it matter? Why am I always the afterthought, the one whose needs come last, whose dreams get sacrificed for everyone else's convenience? The question hung in the air between us, and I realized I wasn't just asking Andrew. I was asking the universe, asking God, asking anyone who might have an answer to the question that had haunted me my entire life. Andrew leaned against the bridge railing, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I don't know, Sarah. I really don't know. But I know it's not right. Knowing it's not right and doing something about it are two different things. What do you want me to do? The papers are signed. The money's been transferred. Jessica's already put a deposit down on office space. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Andrew wasn't happy, despite having everything handed to him, despite being the golden child, the chosen one. He looked miserable. There were dark circles under his eyes, lines of stress around his mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. Are you happy, Andrew? With Jessica? With the business? With the way things are going? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He opened his mouth as if to give the automatic response. Of course he was happy. Everything was perfect. Life was great. But then he closed it again and just stared at the water. I don't know, he said finally. I thought having everything figured out, having the perfect plan, would make me happy. But lately I feel like I'm living someone else's life, like I'm playing a role that was written for me before I was even born. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, maybe ever. And despite everything, despite the betrayal, despite the stolen land, despite the lifetime of being second best, I felt a flicker of sympathy for my brother. And then why don't you change it? Because I don't know how. Because everyone's counting on me. Because if I mess this up, I'll disappoint Dad and Mom and Jessica and... He trailed off, but I knew what he was going to say. And you've never disappointed them before? No, never. And I don't know how to start now. We stood there in silence for a while, listening to the creek trickle beneath us and the distant sound of cattle in the Hendersons' pasture. The sun was starting to sink lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the water. I should go, I said finally. I have to be at work early tomorrow. Sarah, wait. Andrew pushed himself off the railing and took a step toward me. I know I can't fix this. I know the damage is already done. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry Mom did this. And I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to stop it. I looked at him for a long moment. This brother I'd grown up with but never really known. This person who'd been given everything I'd ever wanted but seemed just as lost as I felt. I'm sorry too, Andrew. I'm sorry we never learned how to be a real family. I'm sorry we never figured out how to care about each other instead of competing with each other. Maybe it's not too late for that. Maybe not. But it is too late for the land. I walked back to my car, leaving Andrew standing on the bridge. As I drove away, I caught sight of him in my rearview mirror, still leaning against the railing, still staring down at the water as if it might hold answers to questions he'd never known how to ask. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment above Henderson Hardware, surrounded by the boxes I'd started packing in preparation for my move to Grandpa's land. Box after box of books about sustainable farming, organic gardening, small-scale livestock management, plans and dreams and hopes, all carefully researched and organized, all useless now. I pulled out my laptop and began typing an email to my boss at the elementary school, asking if there were any full-time positions available for the fall. If I couldn't have my dream, I'd at least try to build something resembling a decent life from what was left. But as I typed, I couldn't shake the image of Andrew standing on that bridge, looking as lost and hollow as I felt. For the first time in my life, I wondered if being the chosen child was really the blessing I'd always assumed it was. Monday morning came too soon and not soon enough. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through everything that had happened, everything that was about to happen. In less than 24 hours, the Henderson family would officially own the land that should have been mine, and I'd be, what? Still serving coffee at Murphy's, still helping 5-year-olds with their shoelaces, still living in this cramped apartment with its water-stained ceiling and temperamental plumbing. The elementary school was a 15-minute walk from my apartment, past the post office where Mrs. Chen always waved from behind the counter, past the barber shop where old men gathered to discuss the weather and complain about politicians. Millfield was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where your business was everybody's business, where secrets were as rare as snow in July, which meant that by now, half the town probably knew about Grandpa Henry's will and the land sale. Small towns had their own communication networks, faster and more efficient than any internet connection. I pushed through the glass doors of Millfield Elementary, just as the first buses were pulling into the circular drive, disgorging their cargo of sleepy children with lunchboxes and backpacks nearly as big as they were. The familiar smell of floor wax and construction paper hit me like a wave of nostalgia. I'd been working here for 5 years, and despite everything, I loved this place. Loved the chaos and the laughter and the way children saw the world with such pure, uncomplicated hope. Sarah, Mrs. Rodriguez, the principal, appeared in the hallway like she'd been waiting for me. Carmen Rodriguez was in her 50s, a tiny woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of energy that could power a small city. She'd been principal here for 20 years and knew every child, every parent, every teacher's aide by name. "How are you holding up, honey? I heard about your grandfather. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I'm doing okay." She studied my face with the keen perception of someone who'd spent decades reading the emotions of children and adults alike. "Are you sure? You look like you haven't slept." Before I could answer, she was steering me toward her office, closing the door behind us with the practiced efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with crises large and small. "Sit," she commanded, pointing to one of the child-sized chairs that served as her guest seating. It was ridiculous. Grown adults perched on furniture designed for 6-year-olds. But somehow it worked. Something about being literally brought down to a child's level made people more honest, more willing to admit when they needed help. "Talk to me," she said, settling into the other tiny chair. "What's really going on?" And somehow, sitting in that bright yellow chair in an office decorated with children's artwork and motivational posters featuring cartoon animals, I found myself telling her everything. About the land, about Mom's decision, about Andrew and Jessica and the construction company and the 40 acres that were supposed to be my fresh start. Mrs. Rodriguez listened without interrupting, her dark eyes growing more and more concerned as the story unfolded. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, turning a pencil over and over in her hands. "Sarah," she said finally, "how long have you been thinking about leaving Millfield?" The question caught me off guard. What do you mean?" "I mean, how long have you been planning to move to your grandfather's land? How long have you been preparing to leave your job here? Leave the diner, start over somewhere else?" I thought about it. Since he first told me about the inheritance, I guess. So about 2 months. And during those 2 months, did you ever mention your plans to anyone here? To me? To the other teachers? To your students? I opened my mouth to say yes. Of course I had. But then I realized the truth. No. I was afraid to say anything. Afraid it might not happen. Afraid I might jinx it somehow. She nodded as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "Sarah, in the 5 years you've worked here, you've never talked about your future. Not once. You've never mentioned career goals, or places you'd like to travel, or dreams you want to pursue. It's like you've been holding your breath, waiting for your real life to begin. The observation stung, because it was so accurate. I had been holding my breath, had been treating everything in my life as temporary, as something to be endured until something better came along. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe this is an opportunity, instead of a disaster. Maybe this is life forcing you to stop waiting and start living. Mrs. Rodriguez, with all due respect, I just lost my inheritance. I lost my chance at a better future. How is that an opportunity? She leaned forward in her tiny chair, her expression intense. Because now you have to create your own opportunity, instead of waiting for someone else to hand you one. Sarah, you're one of the best teacher's aides I've ever worked with. The children adore you. The teachers love you. And you have a natural gift for education. But you've been treating this job like it's temporary, like you're just marking time until something better comes along. Because this was never supposed to be permanent. Says who? Who decided that working with children, helping to shape young minds, making a difference in kids' lives, who decided that wasn't a worthy career? Who decided that wasn't enough? The question hit me like a physical blow. I realized I'd been hearing Mom's voice in my head, Dad's voice, the voices of a family that had always made it clear that teaching was a nice hobby for women, but not a real career, not something that mattered in the way Andrew's business ventures mattered. I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. Mrs. Patterson in 3rd grade is retiring at the end of this school year. I've been trying to fill her position, but I haven't found the right candidate yet. The job is yours if you want it. Full-time, benefits, a real salary. You'd need to finish your degree, but we have programs that help with that. You could take classes in the evenings, during summers. I stared at her, trying to process what she was offering. A real teaching position. Something permanent, something that mattered, something that was mine based on my own merit instead of family connections or inherited wealth. And I know it's not the same as owning land, she said gently, but it's a foundation. It's something to build on. And Sarah, the way you work with these kids, you don't just help them with their schoolwork. You see them, really see them. The shy ones, the struggling ones, the ones who need extra attention. You have a gift for making them feel valued. As if summoned by our conversation, there was a soft knock on the office door. A small face appeared in the window. Tommy Chen, Mrs. Chen's grandson, a 2nd grader who'd struggled with reading until I'd started working with him one-on-one during lunch breaks. "Come in, Tommy," Mrs. Rodriguez called. He opened the door just wide enough to slip through, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles, his t-shirt already wrinkled despite the early hour. "Miss Sarah?" His face lit up when he saw me. "I read a whole chapter book this weekend, by myself. Grandma said to tell you thank you." He thrust the book toward me. Frog and Toad Are Friends. A simple chapter book that might as well have been Shakespeare for a child who'd struggled to read simple sentences just 6 months ago. "Tommy, that's wonderful." I took the book, feeling its familiar weight in my hands. "And tell me about your favorite part." As he launched into an enthusiastic retelling of Frog and Toad's adventures, complete with dramatic gestures and sound effects, I felt something shift inside me. This was real. This mattered. This little boy's excitement about reading, his pride in his accomplishment, his trust in me. This was worth something. When Tommy finished his story and skipped off to join his classmates, Mrs. Rodriguez and I sat in silence for a moment. "And that's what I'm talking about," she said quietly. "That's what you do here, Sarah. You change lives. You help children discover they're capable of more than they thought possible. How is that not a worthy dream?" I thought about my plans for the 40 acres, the house I'd wanted to build, the garden I'd dreamed of planting. Those had been dreams about creating something beautiful, something lasting, something that mattered. But wasn't that exactly what teaching was, too? "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Of course you do. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, remember that sometimes the dreams we're meant to pursue find us instead of the other way around." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine activities, helping Mrs. Patterson's 3rd graders with their math worksheets, reading with struggling students, supervising recess where I watched children negotiate the complex social dynamics of playground politics. But everything felt different now, seen through the lens of Mrs. Rodriguez's offer. Could I be happy here? Could I build a life in Millfield that didn't feel like settling for less than I deserved? During my lunch break, I walked to Murphy's Diner for my afternoon shift. Rita was behind the counter as usual, her gray hair pinned back with bobby pins, her apron stained with today's special, meatloaf and mashed potatoes. "Heard about your grandpa's land," she said without preamble, the way Rita always cut straight to the heart of things. "Heard your mama sold it to the Hendersons." I tied my apron around my waist and picked up a coffee pot, needing something to do with my hands. News travels fast. Honey, in this town, news travels at the speed of light. Question is, what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? Rita studied me with the kind of direct gaze that had probably intimidated truckers and traveling salesmen for 4 decades. I mean, are you going to roll over and take it? Or are you going to fight for what's yours? It's already done, Rita. Papers are signed. Money's transferred. The Hendersons take possession tomorrow. That don't mean it's over. Sometimes the most important battles happen after the war's supposedly been lost. Before I could ask what she meant, the lunch crowd started filtering in. Farmers taking a break from their work, office workers from the bank and the courthouse, retirees who came to Murphy's every day for the company as much as the food. I spent the next few hours pouring coffee, taking orders, and listening to the easy conversation of people who'd known each other all their lives. At one of the back booths, I noticed a familiar face, Jessica Wilson, Andrew's fiancée, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and a slice of pie she wasn't eating. She looked out of place in her designer clothes and perfect makeup, like a magazine cutout pasted into a Norman Rockwell painting. Our eyes met across the diner, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then Jessica raised her hand slightly, a tentative greeting, and after a moment's hesitation, I walked over to her booth. "Hi, Sarah," she said quietly. "I was hoping I might see you here." "Jessica." I refilled her coffee cup, even though it was still mostly full, needing something to do with my hands. "I didn't expect to see you in Millfield on a Monday. I drove down this morning. I wanted to talk to you about what happened yesterday." I slid into the booth across from her, acutely aware of the curious glances from other customers. Jessica Wilson having coffee with Sarah Mitchell was the kind of thing that would be discussed over dinner tables throughout Millfield. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Jessica picked at her pie with her fork, not meeting my eyes. "Andrew told me what your mother did, about the land that was supposed to be yours. And I think it's terrible. I think it's unfair and wrong. And..." She looked up at me then, and I was surprised to see genuine distress in her perfectly made-up eyes. "I had no idea, Sarah. I swear to you, I had no idea your mother was planning to sell that land to fund our business. If I had known, I would have told Andrew we couldn't accept the money." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but all I saw was a young woman who seemed as confused and troubled as I felt. "But you did accept it, because I didn't know where it came from. Your mother presented it as a wedding gift, said she wanted to help us get started. She never mentioned that it was your inheritance she was giving away." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. I'd been prepared to hate Jessica, to see her as part of the conspiracy that had stolen my future, but she seemed as much a victim of Mom's manipulations as I was. "So what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. Andrew and I had a long talk last night, and then another one this morning. He's not happy about this, Sarah. He feels terrible about what happened. Terrible enough to give the money back." Jessica was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup around and around in its saucer. "It's complicated. We've already committed to loans, signed lease agreements for office space. Our whole future is built around having this capital to start the business. So is that a no? I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I wanted you to know that this wasn't some scheme we cooked up. We never asked your mother to sell your inheritance to help us. We didn't even know about the land until yesterday." I believed her. Despite everything, despite my anger and hurt and sense of betrayal, I believed that Jessica was telling the truth, which somehow made everything worse, because it meant that Mom had acted alone, had made the decision to sacrifice my future for Andrew's without consulting anyone, without considering any alternatives. "Jessica," I said carefully, "can I ask you something?" She nodded. "Are you happy? With Andrew? With the plans you've made? With the life you're building together?" The question seemed to surprise her as much as it had surprised Andrew yesterday. She opened her mouth as if to give the automatic response. Of course she was happy. Everything was perfect. Life was wonderful. But then she closed it again and really thought about the question. "And I thought I was," she said finally. "I thought having everything planned out, having the perfect wedding and the perfect business plan and the perfect house picked out, I thought that would make me happy. But lately, I feel like I'm suffocating, like I'm living someone else's idea of what my life should be. It was almost exactly what Andrew had said on the bridge yesterday. Two people who seemed to have everything, who were living the dream that everyone else envied, and they were both miserable. Then, why are you doing it? Because I don't know what else to do. Because everyone expects it. Because I've never been the kind of person who rocks the boat or disappoints people. I've spent my whole life being the good daughter, the perfect student, the ideal fiancé. I don't know how to be anything else. I looked at this young woman, beautiful, educated, privileged, everything I'd always thought I wanted to be, and realized we weren't so different after all. We'd both been shaped by other people's expectations, both been trained to put everyone else's needs before our own. Maybe it's not too late to figure out who you really are, I said. Maybe not. But it is too late to undo what's already been done. The damage is already done, Sarah. I can't give you back what you've lost. She was right. Of course. The land was gone. Sold to the Hendersons, who would probably turn it into pasture for their cattle. My dream of a small house near the oak tree, of a garden and chickens and a life built with my own hands. That dream was dead and buried, but sitting there in Murphy's diner, looking at Jessica's troubled face and thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's offer, I began to wonder if maybe that dream hadn't been the right one anyway. Maybe it had been someone else's idea of what my life should be, just like Jessica and Andrew were living someone else's idea of what their lives should be. I should get back to work, I said, sliding out of the booth. Sarah, wait. Jessica reached across the table and touched my hand. I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry this happened to you, and I'm sorry we're benefiting from something that was rightfully yours. I looked down at her manicured hand on mine, then back up at her face. Jessica, can I give you some advice? She nodded. Don't marry Andrew because it's what everyone expects you to do. Don't start a business you're not passionate about just because it looks good on paper. Don't build a life that makes you feel like you're suffocating. What if I disappoint people? Then you disappoint people. But at least you'll be disappointing them while living your own life instead of someone else's. I walked back to the counter, leaving Jessica alone with her untouched pie and her complicated thoughts. Rita was watching me with that keen expression she got when she was trying to figure something out. That looked like an interesting conversation, she said. Just two people trying to figure out how we ended up in lives that don't fit us. Rita nodded as if this made perfect sense. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a person is having their old life fall apart. Clears the way for building something better. You think losing my inheritance is the best thing that could happen to me. I think maybe it's time you stopped waiting for other people to give you permission to be happy. Time you stopped treating your own dreams like they don't matter. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself thinking about Rita's words, about Mrs. Rodriguez's offer, about my conversation with Jessica. Maybe they were right. Maybe this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the end of the chapter I'd been trying to write in someone else's book. But if that was true, then what came next? What did Sarah Mitchell's story look like when she stopped waiting for other people to write it for her? Tuesday morning arrived like a funeral procession. Slow, inevitable, and filled with finality. Today was the day the Henderson family would officially take possession of Grandpa Henry's 40 acres. Today was the day my dreams would be legally transferred to someone else's name. I stood at my apartment window, watching the sun rise over the rooftops of Millfield, and tried to decide what to do with myself. I didn't have to work at the school until afternoon, and my shift at Murphy's didn't start until evening. For the first time in years, I had hours of unstructured time stretching ahead of me, and I had no idea how to fill them. My phone rang, startling me out of my reverie. Mom's name appeared on the screen. Sarah, honey, I was hoping we could talk. About what? I asked, though I already knew. About yesterday, about the way you left. I know you're upset, but I think if we could just sit down and discuss this like adults. Mom, there's nothing to discuss. You sold my inheritance to fund Andrew's business. End of story. It's not that simple. And you know it. Sometimes parents have to make difficult decisions for the good of the whole family. The good of the whole family. As if I weren't part of the family. As if my needs and dreams didn't factor into the equation at all. Where's the closing happening? I asked suddenly. What? The land sale. Where are the Hendersons signing the papers? There was a pause. Sarah, I don't think it's a good idea for you to... Where, Mom? Another pause. Longer this time. At Raymond Burke's office. The lawyer on Main Street. But Sarah, please don't make a scene. This is already hard enough without... I hung up the phone and stared at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had dark circles under her eyes, hair that needed washing, and the defeated expression of someone who'd given up fighting. But somewhere behind that exhaustion, I caught a glimpse of something else, something that looked like determination. Raymond Burke's law office was in a converted Victorian house on Main Street, sandwiched between the flower shop and the pharmacy. I'd walked past it thousands of times, but never had occasion to go inside. The waiting room was decorated like someone's grandmother's living room, all floral wallpaper and doilies and furniture that had probably been elegant 20 years ago. The receptionist, a woman about my age with elaborately curled hair, looked up from her computer when I entered. "Can I help you? I'm here about the Henderson land purchase. I'm Sarah Mitchell." Her expression shifted slightly, the way people's faces change when they recognize you from gossip they've heard. "Oh, I'm not sure. Let me check with Mr. Burke." She disappeared through a door marked private, and I could hear muffled voices from the other room. A moment later, Raymond Burke himself emerged, a tall, thin man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that wasn't common in Millfield. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I wasn't expecting to see you here today. I wanted to be present for the closing. I'm not sure that's appropriate. This is a private transaction between your mother and the Henderson family. It's a transaction involving land that was promised to me by my grandfather. I think that makes me an interested party." Mr. Burke studied my face for a moment, probably trying to determine how much trouble I was planning to cause. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you're upset about this situation, but the law is clear. Your grandfather left the land to your mother, with no legal restrictions on how she chose to dispose of it. I'm not here to contest the sale," I said, though even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure it was true. "I just want to be present, to witness the transfer of my family's land." Before he could respond, the front door opened, and the Henderson family entered. Jack Henderson, a burly man in his 50s who owned the largest cattle operation in the county, his wife Mary, and their son Tom, who'd graduated from high school a year behind me. They looked surprised to see me there, and more than a little uncomfortable. "Sarah," Mary Henderson said, her voice gentle, "Honey, we're so sorry for your loss. Your grandfather was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. We want you to know," Jack added, "that we'll take good care of the land. We know how much it meant to your family." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. These were good people, neighbors who'd lived in Millfield all their lives, who'd probably agonized over whether to buy the land, knowing it was supposed to be mine. They weren't the villains in this story. Mom arrived a few minutes later, looking perfectly composed in a navy blue dress and matching heels. She paused when she saw me, her expression flickering between annoyance and something that might have been guilt. "Sarah, I asked you not to come here, and I decided to come anyway." We stared at each other across the floral carpeted waiting room, 30 years of complicated history stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, Mr. Burke cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should get started. The conference room is this way." The conference room was even more aggressively decorated than the waiting room, with oil paintings of hunting scenes and a mahogany table that dominated the space. We arranged ourselves around it like participants in a bizarre dinner party. Mom at one end, the Hendersons on one side, me sitting alone on the other side like a defendant at my own trial. Mr. Burke began the proceedings, his voice taking on the formal cadence lawyers use for such occasions. He read through the property description, the terms of sale, the transfer documents. 40 acres, more or less, bounded on the north by Miller's Creek, on the south by the old county road, on the east and west by properties owned by other local families. As he spoke, I found myself thinking about all the times I'd walked that land with Grandpa Henry. The oak tree where he'd proposed to Grandma Eleanor 60 years ago. The creek where we'd caught crawdads on summer afternoons. The hill where he'd taught me to identify different types of wildflowers. Where he'd told me stories about his own grandfather who'd homesteaded the land in the 1890s. And the purchase price, Mr. Burke continued, is the sum of $250,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $250,000. More money than I'd ever imagined. Certainly more than I'd make in 5 years working at the elementary school and the diner. Money that could have changed my life completely. Could have given me security and options and possibilities I'd never dared dream of. Money that was now going to fund Andrew's construction company and Jessica's law practice and their perfect life together. "Mrs. Mitchell," Mr. Burke said, turning to my mother, "do you accept these terms?" "I do." "Mr. Henderson, Do you accept these terms? We do. And just like that, it was done. Papers were signed, hands were shaken, checks were exchanged. 4 generations of Mitchell family history, sold in less than 30 minutes. The Hendersons left first, offering me awkward condolences and promises to care for the land. Mr. Burke excused himself to make copies of the documents. And then it was just Mom and me, sitting across from each other in that over-decorated conference room. "Sarah," she began, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I have something to say, and I want you to listen without interrupting." She sat back in her chair, her expression wary. 30 years ago, when I was born, you had a choice. You could raise me to believe that I mattered, that my dreams were worth pursuing, that I deserved the same opportunities and support as Andrew. Or you could raise me to believe that I was less important, that my role was to support other people's dreams instead of pursuing my own. Mom opened her mouth to protest, but I continued before she could speak. You chose the second option. Maybe you didn't do it consciously. Maybe you thought you were preparing me for the realities of life as a woman, but the result was the same. I learned that my needs came last, that my dreams didn't matter, that my job was to take care of everyone else and be grateful for whatever scraps were left over. "That's not true," Mom said quietly. "I love you, Sarah. I've always loved you. I believe you love me. But love and respect are different things, and respect and value are different things. You've never respected my choices or valued my contributions. When I decided to stay in Millfield and take care of Grandpa, you saw it as settling for less, instead of recognizing it as a sacrifice I was making for family. When I worked 2 jobs to put myself through school, you saw it as proof that I lacked ambition instead of evidence of my determination. When I dedicated 8 years of my life to caring for our grandfather, you saw it as, killing time until something better came along. Mom's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but she didn't interrupt. And when Grandpa Henry promised me that land, promised me a chance to build something of my own, to create a life that mattered, you took it away without a second thought. Because in your mind, Andrew's success is more important than mine. Andrew's dreams are more valuable than mine. Andrew's future matters more than mine. Sarah, please, I'm not finished. My voice was steady, calmer than I'd expected. I want you to know that I forgive you, not because you've asked for forgiveness, and not because what you did was right, but because holding on to anger would only hurt me more than it's already hurt you. I stood up from the table, my legs surprisingly steady beneath me. But I also want you to know that this is the end. I'm done waiting for you to see me as worthy of respect. I'm done hoping you'll value my dreams as much as Andrew's. I'm done being the daughter who sacrifices everything and gets nothing in return. What does that mean? It means I'm choosing myself for the first time in my life. It means I'm going back to school to get my teaching degree, and I'm going to build a career that matters to me. It means I'm going to stop apologizing for not being Andrew, stop trying to earn approval from people who've already decided I'm not worth their investment. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. And, Mom, when Andrew's construction company fails, and it will, because he doesn't really want it and Jessica doesn't really want it, when it fails and you realize you sold 4 generations of family land for nothing, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that you had a daughter who would have treasured that land, who would have built something beautiful and lasting on it, who would have honored Grandpa Henry's memory instead of treating his legacy like a commodity to be traded. I left Mom sitting in that conference room and walked out into the bright Georgia sunshine. Main Street was busy with the usual Tuesday afternoon activity, people running errands, children riding bikes, the normal rhythm of small-town life that would continue long after this day was forgotten by everyone except me. But as I walked back toward my apartment, I realized something had changed. The crushing weight of disappointment I'd been carrying since Sunday morning was still there, but it felt different now, lighter, somehow. As if speaking those words to Mom had lifted something off my shoulders that I'd been carrying for years without even realizing it. My phone buzzed. A text from Andrew. "Sarah, I heard you were at the closing today. Can we please talk?" I deleted the message without responding. Another text. This one from Jessica. "I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't help, but I wanted you to know." I stared at her message for a long moment, then typed back, "Take care of yourself, Jessica. Don't let other people write your story." She responded almost immediately. "What do you mean?" But I was already putting my phone away. I had things to do, a life to rebuild, a future to plan, dreams to pursue that belonged to me and no one else. That evening, I worked my shift at Murphy's with a strange sense of lightness. The familiar routine of taking orders and pouring coffee felt different somehow, like I was seeing everything through new eyes. When Rita asked me how the closing had gone, I told her about my conversation with Mom. "Good for you," she said, refilling the napkin dispensers with the efficient movements of someone who'd been doing the same job for decades. "About time you stopped letting other people tell you who you are. Rita, can I ask you something? Shoot. Do you ever regret staying in Millfield? Never leaving? Never seeing what else was out there?" She considered the question while wiping down the counter. "I left once. Moved to Atlanta when I was 22. Got a job at a fancy restaurant. Thought I was going to see the world. Came back 6 months later with my tail between my legs. What happened? Nothing dramatic. I just realized that running away from your problems doesn't solve them. You take yourself with you wherever you go, and if you don't like who you are, changing your address isn't going to fix that." She hung the dish rag over the sink and turned to face me. "The question isn't whether you stay or go, Sarah. The question is whether you're running towards something or running away from something. Big difference." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and started making a list. Not a list of dreams that depended on other people's choices. Not a fantasy about inheriting land or winning the lottery or finding a perfect partner to solve all my problems. A list of things I could do, starting tomorrow, to build the life I actually wanted. A finish college degree, I wrote at the top of the page. Accept teaching position. Find a better apartment. Start a savings account. Learn to play guitar. Take a photography class. Join a hiking group. Small things, mostly. Achievable things. Things that didn't require anyone else's permission or approval or financial support. At the bottom of the list, I wrote, "Stop waiting for life to begin." I looked at those words for a long time, thinking about all the years I'd spent in holding patterns, all the dreams I'd deferred until someday, all the ways I'd made myself smaller so other people could be bigger. Then I picked up my pen and crossed out, "Stop waiting for life to begin." In its place, I wrote, "Life begins now." 6 months later, I was standing in front of my own classroom for the first time, watching 22 third graders file in with their brand new backpacks and first day of school excitement. The walls were covered with colorful posters I'd spent the summer creating. The reading corner was stocked with books I'd carefully selected, and my desk held a small framed photo of Grandpa Henry that I'd placed there for luck. "Good morning, class," I said, and felt a thrill at the words. My class, my students, my classroom. The months since the land closing had passed like pages in a book I was writing myself. I'd accepted Mrs. Rodriguez's job offer and enrolled in the State University's education program, taking night classes and weekend seminars to finish my degree. I'd moved into a small house on Elm Street, nothing fancy, but it had a garden where I could grow tomatoes and a front porch where I could sit in the evenings and watch the world go by. Most importantly, I'd learned to measure my life by my own standards instead of other people's expectations. It hadn't been easy. There were nights when I'd lie awake wondering if I'd made the right choices. Days when I'd catch myself checking social media to see updates about Andrew and Jessica's wedding preparations. Moments when the old familiar ache of not being enough would creep back in. But those moments were getting rarer. In their place was something I'd never experienced before. A sense of ownership over my own life. A feeling that the choices I was making were truly mine. "Miss Mitchell?" A small hand shot up in the front row. "Are you going to be our teacher all year?" I looked down at the serious face of Emma Rodriguez, Mrs. Rodriguez's youngest granddaughter, a girl who'd been held back a year because of learning difficulties and was now in my class. "Yes, Emma, I'm going to be your teacher all year." "Good," she said solemnly. "I was worried you might leave like some teachers do." The comment hit me harder than it should have. This child had already experienced instability, had already learned that adults sometimes made promises they didn't keep. But here, in this classroom, I could offer her something different. "Emma, I want you to know something," I said, kneeling down so we were at eye level. "I'm not going anywhere. This is where I want to be, and these are the students I want to teach. You can count on me." Her face lit up with relief and something that looked like hope. The first few weeks of school fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. I discovered that I loved the challenge of reaching different types of learners, the satisfaction of watching a struggling reader finally decode a difficult word, the joy of seeing children get excited about learning something new. But it was after school hours that I found the most unexpected rewards. I'd started an after-school tutoring program for kids who needed extra help, and word had spread quickly through the community. Parents who couldn't afford private tutoring brought their children to me, and I found myself working with students ranging from kindergarten to 8th grade. One afternoon in October, I was helping Marcus Thompson, a 5th grader who'd been struggling with fractions, when I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. Is Miss Mitchell available? I looked up to see Andrew standing in my classroom doorway, looking uncomfortable and out of place among the colorful decorations and child-sized furniture. He was thinner than he'd been 6 months ago, and there were new lines of stress around his eyes. "Marcus, why don't you work on problems 5 through 10 while I talk to my visitor?" I said, then walked over to where Andrew stood. "This is unexpected," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I was hoping we could talk. I know you probably don't want to see me, but actually, I don't mind seeing you, but I'm working right now, and Marcus needs my help. Can you wait?" He nodded and took a seat in one of the adult-sized chairs I kept for parent conferences. For the next 20 minutes, he watched silently as I worked with Marcus, explaining fractions using manipulatives and visual aids until the concept finally clicked. "I get it," Marcus said, his face lighting up. "It's like cutting up a pizza." "Exactly like cutting up a pizza. You're going to do great on tomorrow's test." After Marcus packed up his things and left with his mother, Andrew and I were alone in the classroom. Evening light streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the student desks. "You're good at this," Andrew said quietly. "Really good. I watched you with that kid. And you have a gift, Sarah." "Thank you. Was there something you wanted to talk about?" He was quiet for a moment, looking around the classroom at the student artwork on the walls, the reading corner with its comfortable cushions, the science center where I'd set up simple experiments for the children to explore. "The business failed," he said finally. I sat down across from him, not entirely surprised by the news. "What happened?" "Everything. Nothing." "I don't know." He ran his hand through his hair, the gesture achingly familiar from our childhood. "The loan fell through because I couldn't prove sufficient experience in the construction industry. The office space Jessica picked out was twice what we could afford. But honestly, I think we were sabotaging it from the beginning." "Why do you think that?" "Because neither of us really wanted it. We were doing what we thought we were supposed to do, what everyone expected us to do, but when it came down to actually building something, actually putting in the work, we just didn't have the passion for it." I thought about my conversation with Jessica at Murphy's Diner, her admission that she felt like she was suffocating, like she was living someone else's idea of what her life should be. "What about the wedding?" Andrew's laugh was bitter. "Called off, 3 weeks before the ceremony. Jessica finally admitted she'd been having doubts for months, and I realized I'd been having them too. We were getting married because it was the next step in the plan, not because we actually wanted to spend our lives together." "I'm sorry, Andrew." "Are you? Really?" I considered the question honestly. 6 months ago, I might have felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction hearing about Andrew's failures. But now, looking at my brother's defeated expression, all I felt was sympathy. "Yes, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you invested so much time and energy in something that wasn't right for you. I'm sorry you felt pressured to live up to other people's expectations instead of figuring out what you actually wanted." "Mom is devastated," he said, "and she keeps talking about how much potential I'm wasting, how disappointed Dad is going to be. And what do you think? I think maybe wasting potential that was never really mine to begin with isn't the worst thing in the world. I think maybe disappointing people who never really saw me as an individual person isn't something I need to lose sleep over." It was perhaps the most honest thing Andrew had ever said to me. For the first time in our lives, we were having a real conversation, instead of playing the roles we'd been assigned in childhood. "What are you going to do now?" "I don't know. I've been staying at Dad's company apartment, but that's not going to last much longer. I need to find a job, figure out what I actually want to do with my life." He looked around the classroom again. "And I keep thinking about what you said at the bridge that day, about how I've never disappointed them before and I don't know how to start. Well, I'm starting now. How does it feel?" "Terrifying, but also kind of liberating. For the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan. I don't know what's going to happen next, and that's actually okay." I understood exactly what he meant. The security of having everything planned out was also a kind of prison, especially when the plans weren't really yours. "Andrew, can I ask you something?" "Sure. What would you do if you could do anything? If there were no expectations, no family pressure, no predetermined path you were supposed to follow?" He was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the playground where children had played during recess earlier that day. I think I'd like to work with my hands," he said finally. "Build things, but not big commercial projects. Maybe furniture or renovation work on old houses, something where I could see the results of my labor, where I could take pride in the craftsmanship. That sounds wonderful. It sounds impractical. It sounds like something that would disappoint everyone. It sounds like something that would make you happy. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never seen before. Respect. When did you get so wise? When I stopped caring about disappointing people who were never going to be satisfied anyway. We talked for another hour as the sun set outside the classroom windows. Andrew told me about the panic attacks he'd been having, the sleepless nights, the growing realization that the life everyone expected him to live felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. I told him about my teaching classes, my students, the satisfaction I found in work that felt meaningful and authentic. "I have something for you," he said as we prepared to leave. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. "It's not much, but it's something." I opened the envelope to find a check for $15,000. "Andrew, I can't take this. It's money from the business account, what was left after we paid back the loans and canceled the contracts. I know it's not nearly enough to make up for what you lost, but I don't want it." He stared at me in surprise. "Sarah, please, let me do this one thing right. You don't understand. I don't want it because I don't need it. 6 months ago, I thought losing that land was the worst thing that could happen to me. But it wasn't. It was the best thing, because it forced me to stop waiting for other people to give me permission to be happy." I handed the check back to him. "Use this money to figure out what you actually want to do with your life. Take a woodworking class, learn a trade, travel somewhere you've always wanted to go. But do it for yourself, not because you owe me something. Are you sure?" "I'm sure." As we walked out of the school together, Andrew stopped suddenly and turned to face me. "Sarah, I need to say something. I've been a terrible brother to you. I was so caught up in being the person everyone wanted me to be that I never saw who you actually were. I never appreciated the sacrifices you made, the strength you showed, the way you took care of everyone while I was off playing the role of the golden child. Andrew, no, let me finish. You deserved better from all of us. You deserved parents who valued your dreams as much as mine. You deserved a brother who stood up for you, instead of just accepting the benefits of being the favorite. You deserved that land, and you deserved a family who recognized what an amazing person you are." I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were good tears, tears of healing rather than hurt. "Thank you for saying that. I should have said it years ago." We hugged goodbye in the school parking lot, and for the first time since childhood, it felt like an embrace between siblings who actually knew and cared about each other. Over the following months, I watched Andrew begin to rebuild his life on his own terms. He took a job with a local contractor, learning the trade from the ground up. He moved into a small apartment above the bakery on Main Street. He started taking evening classes in furniture making at the community college. Mom struggled with his transformation. She called me several times, asking if I'd talk to him, wondering if there was something she could do to get him back on track. I listened patiently to her concerns, and gently suggested that maybe Andrew was finally finding his own track for the first time in his life. "I just don't understand," she said during one particularly difficult conversation. "He had so much potential." "He still has potential, Mom. He's just using it differently than you expected." "But furniture making? Manual labor? What will people think?" Maybe it's time to stop worrying about what other people think and start caring about what makes Andrew happy. The conversation ended awkwardly, as most of our conversations did these days. Mom and I were still finding our way toward a new relationship, one where I wasn't constantly seeking her approval, and she wasn't constantly trying to manage my choices. It was slow progress, but it was progress. The real revelation came the following spring, almost a year after the land closing. I was driving past the old property on my way to visit a student's family when I decided to stop and see what the Hendersons had done with it. The 40 acres looked exactly the same as they always had, rolling hills covered with wild flowers, the old oak tree standing sentinel near the creek, cattle grazing peacefully in the afternoon sun. It was beautiful and serene and perfectly maintained, just as I'd known it would be under the Hendersons' care. But as I stood there looking at the land I'd once dreamed of calling home, I realized something surprising. I didn't want it anymore. Not because I was bitter or because I'd given up on my dreams, but because my dreams had evolved. The life I was building, teaching children, making a difference in my community, creating something meaningful with my own hands and heart and mind, that life was better than the one I'd originally planned. The house I'd wanted to build near the oak tree would have been beautiful, but it would have been a house for one person. isolated from the community I'd come to love. The garden I'd dreamed of planting would have fed my family, but the minds I was nurturing in my classroom would feed future generations. I'd thought I needed land to build something lasting. Instead, I'd built something lasting in the lives of my students, in the relationships I was forming, in the example I was setting for other women who'd been told their dreams didn't matter. As I drove home that evening, I thought about Grandpa Henry and what he'd really wanted for me. He'd wanted me to have a foundation, a place to build something meaningful and beautiful, and I'd found that, just not in the way either of us had expected. That night, I called Mom for the first time in months. "Sarah?" She sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine, Mom. I was calling because I wanted to tell you something." "What's that?" "I wanted to tell you that I forgive you. Completely. And I wanted to thank you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Thank me for selling the land, for forcing me to find my own way instead of taking the easy path, for making me strong enough to build a life that actually fits me instead of settling for someone else's idea of what my life should be. Sarah, I never meant to hurt you. I know. And you didn't. Not really. You gave me something much more valuable than land, Mom. You gave me the motivation to prove to myself that I was worth more than anyone ever expected. When we hung up, I felt something I'd never experienced before in relation to my family. Peace. Not the fragile peace of avoiding conflict, but the deeper peace that comes from accepting people as they are, while also accepting yourself as you are. 2 years later, I was named Teacher of the Year for our district. The ceremony was held in the high school auditorium, with parents and community members filling the seats. As I walked across the stage to accept the award, I caught sight of familiar faces in the audience. Andrew was there, looking proud and genuinely happy for the first time I could remember. He'd opened his own furniture shop by then, specializing in custom pieces for local families, and he seemed to have found the contentment that had eluded him for so many years. Mom and Dad were there too, sitting together in the front row. Mom was crying, not tears of disappointment this time, but tears of pride. She'd finally begun to understand that success came in many different forms, and that her daughter had found her own version of it. But the face that meant the most to me was in the second row. Rita Murphy, now retired from the diner, beaming at me with the satisfaction of someone who'd always known this day would come. After the ceremony, as I stood in the lobby accepting congratulations from colleagues and community members, a young woman approached me. She was probably in her mid-20s, with the kind of uncertain expression I recognized from my own younger years. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Jennifer Adams. I work at the bank downtown. Nice to meet you, Jennifer. I wanted to talk to you because I heard your story. About what happened with your family's land. About how you built your career from scratch." She paused, gathering courage. "I've been working at the bank for 5 years, but what I really want to do is start my own accounting practice. Everyone tells me I'm crazy, that I should be grateful for the security of my job, that starting my own business is too risky." I looked at this young woman and saw myself 2 years ago, talented, capable, but waiting for permission to pursue her dreams. "What do you think, Jennifer? Do you think you're crazy?" "No, I think I'm scared, but not crazy." "Good. Fear is healthy. It keeps you careful and motivated. But don't let other people's fears become your limitations. How do I start? How do I take that first step when everyone thinks I'm making a mistake?" I smiled, remembering a conversation I'd had with Mrs. Rodriguez what felt like a lifetime ago. You start by realizing that the opinion that matters most is your own. You start by making a plan based on what you want, not what other people expect. And you start by understanding that the biggest risk isn't failure. It's spending your whole life wondering what might have been if you'd been brave enough to try. Jennifer nodded, her expression shifting from uncertainty to determination. "Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear." As she walked away, I felt a familiar sense of satisfaction, not unlike the feeling I got when a struggling student finally mastered a difficult concept. I was passing on something valuable, something that had taken me 30 years to learn, that we are all capable of writing our own stories, but only if we're willing to pick up the pen. That night, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea and thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain of losing the land had been real, and the betrayal by my family had cut deep. But that loss had also been the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life. I'd learned that dreams imposed by other people, no matter how well-intentioned, will never fit as well as dreams we create for ourselves. I'd learned that approval from people who don't really see us is worthless, compared to the respect we give ourselves. And I'd learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen to us is having our old life fall apart, so we can build a new one from the ground up. The 40 acres were still there, still beautiful, still in good hands with the Henderson family, but I no longer needed to own that land to feel rooted. I'd found my foundation in the work I did, the relationships I'd built, and the knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. As I got ready for bed, I caught sight of my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the defeated person who'd sat in Grandpa Henry's kitchen that Sunday morning 2 years ago. This woman had confidence in her eyes, purpose in her posture, and the kind of contentment that comes from living an authentic life. I thought about what Grandpa Henry had said about the land being perfect for new beginnings. He'd been right, just not in the way either of us had expected. I hadn't needed the land for my new beginning. I'd carried it with me all along. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property. Sometimes it's the strength to build your own legacy, one choice at a time, one day at a time, one dream at a time. And sometimes the best revenge against people who underestimate you is to prove them wrong by succeeding on your own terms, in your own way, in your own time. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 32 years old, and I finally know who I am and what I'm worth. And it turns out I'm worth more than 40 acres could ever have given me. I'm worth exactly what I've always been worth, everything.